The fallout continues on Parliament Hill today in the wake of that bombshell report earlier this week that claimed there is intelligence to suggest some MPs have knowingly helped foreign governments.
The word traitor never appeared in any NSICOP review.
But she debunks the idea even that there are semi-witting or witting people.
Either you guys did terrible work,
nor have I seen any evidence to suggest that there are currently so-called traitors in Parliament.
or Justice Hogue is trying to cover it up.
We're tracking this bombshell story that some members of Parliament, MPs, might in fact be so-called double agents working on behalf of other governments, hostile countries.
There's not that much different between the report done by NSICOP. If you look at the bulk of the text, 90% of it is very similar.
So right there, we know there's an example of an MP accepting help from a foreign state, benefiting from it, and nothing was done?
The RCMP can confirm there are investigations into a broad range of foreign interference in Canada, the statement says.
I have the names of a number of parliamentarians in the Conservative Party of Canada who engaged or at high risk of, or for whom there is clear intelligence around foreign interference.
Parliamentarians are, in the words of the intelligence services, semi-witting or witting participants in the efforts of foreign states to interfere in our politics.
The word traitor never appeared in any NSICOP review.
But she debunks the idea even that there are semi-witting or witting people.
We don't know who to believe, and that is a huge issue.
Are you aware of the names of any Liberal parliamentarians, former parliamentarians or candidates that are at risk of being compromised by FI?
Yes, and for other parties as well.
So you have somebody that is acting on behalf of India, seemingly out in the open, trying to influence people about India, and then you then know that that person is feeding information back to India. Why is that person still in this government?
If you watched our previous video or just went online recently, you'll know that the Public Inquiry into Foreign Interference released their final report on Tuesday, January the 28th. The primary finding that had everyone shocked and confused, including us, was that there are no traitors in Parliament, meaning that NSICOP and the Prime Minister were just plain wrong. David McGuinty, the chair of NSICOP committee, went on CTV with Vashi Kapelos recently to address the issue directly, and there is nothing but alarm bells going off for us. We dug into the report to try and see exactly what's going on, and we're not going to sugarcoat it. You're not going to like it.
Let's take a look.
Responding to a report released last year from what's called the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, or NSICOP for short, that report stated the committee had seen troubling intelligence that some parliamentarians are, in the words of the intelligence services, quote, semi-witting or witting participants in the efforts of foreign states to interfere in Canadian politics. Justice Hogue also making 51 recommendations to better protect this country against foreign interference, 24 of which she says could be implemented before the next election. Joining me now to talk about this a little bit more is Public Safety Minister David McGuinty. Hi, Minister. Good to have you here in studio. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you, Vashi.
I wanted to start off on the NSICOP report versus what we heard from Justice Hogue, and particularly because you chaired that committee, and your name was on that report that came out. That report concluded that there was intelligence suggesting that there were basically parliamentarians, former or sitting, who had wittingly engaged in foreign interference. She concludes the opposite, that there is no witting engagement. There are no traitors in Parliament. Who's right?
Well, the first thing I want to say to Madam Justice Hogue is this is an incredible piece of work. This is a really, really good report. A great diagnosis of the challenge of foreign interference and a great series of recommendations for improvement. Look, there's not that much different between the report done by NSICOP. In fact, NSICOP did 3 foreign interference reviews, not 1, and on 2 separate occasions made similar comments. But what she's revealed is she said she's had much more access to more difficult obtained intelligence. So she had more time, more lawyers. Her mandate was different than the work that the review committee at NSICOP does. And another difference is this. At NSICOP, you have 11 parliamentarians. So they're quite steeped in the practice and the art of politics. This was a legal approach to the challenge. And I think taken together, they complement each other. And I think right now it's time for us to move forward to implement much of the change.
Hold on there, Speedy Gonzalez. You think that the report complements yours?
How? When NSICOP and the Prime Minister even were telling us that there's 11 parliamentarians who have been wittingly aiding foreign nations, and the Hogue report comes back and says no.
Well, and Jagmeet goes and reads that report and says,
I am more alarmed today than I was yesterday after having read the report.
so that's the conclusion he came to.
Well, and they were trying to push Pierre Poilievre to get security clearance in order to see this report. Were they trying to push him to get this clearance to fall into a trap? Was there nothing there and they were pushing him anyways, trying to get Canadians to believe that there was something there that Pierre Poilievre needed to see and he was just refusing to?
Well, and this is the other question. If that was the case, then Justin Trudeau, was he lying after testifying under oath during the public inquiry when he said that there are conservative intelligence that he's seen that implicate their party?
And what about those 4 names that Sam Cooper came forward with? Were they on the report? Were they not on the report? Is there a report? Like, we don't know. And that's the problem, is that the Hogue report, the Hogue Commission has come to this conclusion that is completely different than what Canadians have been told up to this point.
Right. And now you have the chair of the NSICOP committee just saying, I think we should just forget about it and move on.
I think right now it's time for us to move forward.
Dude, listen, when that bombshell dropped, there was a whole bunch of people in Canada, millions of Canadians, that they completely distrusted what was going on inside of Parliament because you don't know who those 11 are.
We, as voters, don't know who those 11 are.
So, no, we're not just going to stop and move on.
I am confused on how they might complement each other. And just when you made that comment about there being kind of politics involved, are you intimating that part of the conclusion reached by NSICOP was political in nature?
No, I think that there's just simply an experience that comes to bear when you're a group of parliamentarians deliberating about different fact scenarios and intelligence that's given to you. She's had the benefit of perhaps additional information, as she says in her own review, information that was not brought to our attention at the time. But I don't think there's much daylight here at all between the 2 reviews. I think if you look at the bulk of the text, 90% of it is very similar, and the recommendations tend to be very overlapping.
I would argue that the daylight is that there are people who read your report and your committee's report and concluded there were traitors sitting in Parliament, and that prospect existed for such a long time that there were MPs calling on the government to release names, to name names, versus hers, which is conclusive that there are not traitors in Parliament. I don't get how that's complementary.
The word traitor never appeared in any NSICOP review.
But she debunks the idea even that there are semi-witting or witting people. She says if they are involved in that, based on further evidence that she was able to review and the underlying evidence that you based your conclusions on, that she did not arrive at that conclusion.
Yeah. He's running out of room. He's trying to run, but he's running out of room.
Well, because Vashti is doing her job and cornering him, essentially.
Yeah, he keeps moving these goalposts of, well, you know, we basically said the same thing.
Vashti's we never used the word traitor.
No, you didn't. Well, I don't see a lot of daylight here. Well, the daylight is that you said one thing and Hogue said the exact opposite.
I think the issue here is that Canadians don't know who to trust. And this report today, I think it further erodes our trust in our institutions, which is not good.
Right, because there's no consistency.
Right.
So anyway, let's keep going.
I don't know if she went that far. I think she went as far as saying that there was behavior which was questionable. I think in that sense, she's reaffirming a lot of the findings of the NSICOP review, but there is no indication at all. There never was an indication of the word treasonous or treason or traitors never appeared in any works. I think these were remarks made by an intemperate politician at an intemperate and maybe an inappropriate moment.
Okay, so now you're blaming the people who read your report. What the hell kind of report was it that people are taking that as the conclusion, and what? You're just like, well, that's your problem.
Well, and here's the other problem is that Canadians don't know who to believe. We can't go to the original source because the original source is classified.
Well, here's something that wasn't classified that Vashi's going to read right now.
What the report said. Unfortunately, the committee has also seen troubling intelligence that some parliamentarians are, in the words of intelligence services, semi-witting or witting participants in the efforts of foreign states to interfere in our politics. That doesn't say traitor, but it says a whole lot that she didn't.
Yeah, let's just unpack that. What that says is that there are parliamentarians, whether senators or members of parliament,
Past or present,
past and present, that knowingly collaborated with foreign states against the interests of Canadians. That's basically what it says.
Sounds a lot like treason to me.
Sounds a lot like treason to any rational person with a brain. But this guy's like, well, it doesn't really say that. Oh, it kind of does.
Well, she said there was evidence of very concerning behavior. I don't see a lot of difference between what we're saying, what we said at the time, what she's saying now. And again, she's had the benefit of a different kind of process, maybe a dozen lawyers, hundreds of witnesses, much more time, more resources. But I think you would find if you went back to the NSICOP members of the committee and asked them how they felt, I think they feel that they've made a major contribution. Here's the good news.
But did you jump the gun? To be fair, do you think you put too much? Do you think that part of the report essentially, do you still stand by it? Or should it have been maybe more cautious?
No, absolutely. And in fact, the same language was used in the 2019 Foreign Interference Review, verbatim. Several years later, it was lifted and brought forward. So nobody raised that in 2019, 2020, 2021, or 22, 2023. So we have a situation now where I think we have a go-forward strategy and good recommendations for improvement. That's what I really am focusing on.
I don't recall, I could be wrong, but I don't recall there was a big song and dance made about the NSICOP report being released to the public. So
I don't recall either.
Pretty sure that there wasn't a big song and dance about the NSICOP report released to the public because the NSICOP report goes to the Prime Minister. So who knows? But here's the thing. You can't just say, oh, well, yeah, we stand by it. We don't think we jumped the gun, but we think that this says exactly what it says in the Hogue report. Well, it doesn't. And I know it doesn't because Justice Hogue even says it doesn't. Where does she say that? She says it in the report, folks. Now, this is where we're going to get a little dirty going in to the Hogue Commission's report. So, the first thing I want to show you is something that's in Volume 2, and I believe it's on page 33.
NSICOP said it had seen troubling intelligence that some parliamentarians are, quote, semi-witting or witting and, quote, participants in foreign state efforts to interfere in Canadian politics. I will come back more specifically to this statement, with which I do not entirely agree, in Volume 4, Chapter 18.
Mr. McGinty, Justice Hogue doesn't agree with you. So you can't say, oh, well, this is basically, the same as what Justice Hogue is saying. When Justice Hogue is saying, no, that's not correct, and I don't agree with it. You can't just hitch your frickin' wagon to this and say, don't worry about what we did. Let's just move forward. You caused a dumpster storm, to use parliamentary language, by putting this report out. Now, here's the problem. Tanya said it earlier. Who do we believe? Because either you guys did terrible work and put this out there and launched a firestorm and caused a whole bunch of Canadians, millions of them across the country, to completely mistrust almost every parliamentarian that's sitting on the Hill, or Justice Hogue is trying to cover it up.
But it's worse than that. Either the Prime Minister received a report from NSICOP that said there are 11 traitors in your midst, or he received a report that said, no, these guys aren't really such a big deal, and then tried to apply public pressure to the leader of the opposition to make him get a security clearance and make him take an oath and make him see this report that he couldn't talk about, knowing full well that there was nothing worth knowing about in that report.
And perjuring himself in the process by testifying at the commission that this is what happened.
So which is it? Because it's going to be one or the other.
So let's go and follow the roadmap of where Justice Hogue was leading us. Volume 4, Chapter 18.
As I noted above, CSIS does not always assess the quote-unquote wittingness of parliamentarians. Below, I describe two conclusions about a parliamentarian's wittingness in which the NSICOP report went further than CSIS did.
So for those playing the home game, this is on page 116 in Volume 4 of Justice Hogue's report. And this is written as if Justice Hogue wrote the whole thing. That's why the language is the way it is. Now, what does that first paragraph essentially mean? I interpret that, and I think many people would also interpret this, is that CSIS doesn't evaluate the state of mind of somebody when they're actually looking at this intelligence. They're looking at what the foreign country is actually doing. So if somebody is interacting with that foreign country, what this is saying is CSIS isn't always looking at the fact of, is the person aware of what the foreign country is doing, or are they not aware? That's basically what wittingness means. So let's just get that first paragraph out of the way.
In one assertion, the NSICOP report described what it called a, quote, textbook example of foreign interference that saw a foreign state support a witting politician, end quote. NSICOP referred to a briefing document to support this allegation. That briefing document does not refer to this incident as a, quote, textbook example of foreign interference, end quote. Another document related to this allegation, but not footnoted in the NSICOP report, does describe this incident as a, quote, textbook example of foreign interference, end quote, but does not describe the Member of Parliament, or MP, as a, quote, witting politician, end quote.
Now we get into the mud of semantics, folks. And you have to read this report very carefully to really understand what it's saying. And this is the problem. And this is why we said in our other video, this report creates far more questions than it answers. What do we mean by that? So that paragraph, it says, well, the NSICOP referred to this as this one example as a textbook case of foreign interference. And it used a piece of evidence that it was citing that didn't actually say that. But there was another piece of evidence that existed for that same case that wasn't cited that did refer to it as a textbook case of foreign interference. Who cares if it's a textbook case of foreign interference? Maybe the NSICOP committee forgot to reference that second document, or maybe it referenced the wrong document. Who knows? Either way, sounds like it was a textbook case. The second part of that says, although it says it is a textbook case of foreign interference, it doesn't say whether the parliamentarian or the MP, so it sounds like a member of parliament, was a witting participant. There's a big problem with that because it doesn't say that they were not a witting participant as well.
So essentially, we don't know.
We don't know. Now, here's the other problem with this. You have former CSIS heads coming forward and saying sunlight is the best disinfectant on foreign interference. But guess what? We're not getting
sunlight.
We're not getting any sunlight to illuminate any of these examples. And if we did, we could probably infer whether the person knew or not. But here we are.
Well, it's like this. If I accidentally knock a book off the table onto the floor, book's on the floor, I didn't mean to do it, but I did it. I could also walk up to the table, grab the book, and throw it onto the floor. End result is the same. The book's still on the floor. In one case, it was an accident. I didn't mean to do it. In the second case, I did it willingly. So that's kind of what's going on here.
Well, and And to use that example, basically what that paragraph says is we saw a book fall on the floor.
Right, the book is on the floor. Like that's the conclusion that they came to, is that the book is on the floor and Tanya was standing over top of it. So did I do it on purpose or did I do it by mistake? Well, we didn't examine that. In a written response to the commission, CSIS said that the extent to which this MP was aware of all the details or that they constituted foreign interference was an intelligence gap. CSIS assessed that the politician was aware of and had accepted the assistance of a foreign state, but CSIS did not assess that the politician was wittingly engaging in foreign interference. This nuance and the gap acknowledged by CSIS are important.
This is where I started to get really annoyed in reading this report. So let's use Tanya's example. So what CSIS saw is Tanya picked up the book. Tanya dropped the book. The book fell, but they don't know if she really meant to drop the book. They didn't assess it. That's what that says.
And they didn't say, Tanya, did you mean to drop that book on the floor? Did you drop that book on the floor by accident? Are you aware that you dropped the book on the floor? None of those questions seem to have been asked.
So let's bring this to the real world example. So you have Bob. Bob's an MP. A foreign state approaches Bob and says, hey, Bob, you want some help? Bob says, sure, help me out. And then Bob gets help from the state, the foreign state. This report says, well, even though Bob accepted help from a foreign state and benefited from the foreign state, we don't know if he knew he was committing interference. Are you kidding me?
We didn't ask those questions. We didn't explore that.
Well, and some facts are apparent, aka obvious. I can't even. So right there, we know there's an example of an MP. They didn't. This isn't a hypothetical, folks. This is a real example.
This is in the report. This happened.
Of an MP accepting help from a foreign state and benefiting from it. You can tell I'm getting a little riled up here. And nothing was done? Like, come on. Well, we don't know if he knew.
How can you not know? Elsewhere, the NSICOP report discussed what it described as examples, quote, of members of parliament who worked to influence their colleagues on India's behalf and proactively provided confidential information to Indian officials, end quote. In discussing one such example, CSIS told the commission that it had not actually made an assessment of the wittingness of the MP in question. CSIS witnesses emphasized that CSIS did not necessarily assess the conduct or wittingness of parliamentarians, as it was the foreign states who were being assessed. Information about the parliamentarians was collected incidentally, not because the parliamentarians were being investigated as threats.
Okay.
So,
second example.
Back to the book analogy. This would be like Ryan coming in the room and saying, hey, Tanya, pick up that book and throw it on the floor. But instead of looking at whether I was a witting participant or not and whether I actively picked up that book and threw it on the floor, CSIS is looking at Ryan to see if he told me to do it.
Well, and let's unpack this case. So you have a member of parliament. I'm just going to hypothesize from Indian descent. And they are actively, it says, they are working to influence their colleagues on behalf of India, and then provided information to India, but CSIS didn't assess whether that MP was wittingly doing it.
You know, this is the reason that organizations like Five Eyes stop trusting Canada, because honestly, our intelligence is a joke at this point. that we were paying attention to India and not the MP. Give me a break.
Well, and here's what I would say in CSIS defense here. CSIS defense is going to say, well, listen, like, we can't tell you, we can't get into his mind. What we're supposed to do is give you what happened, and you guys are supposed to make decisions on here. We can't tell you what to do because that's literally your job. That's not our mandate. It's not in the act. It's not in the job description. We can't tell you what to do. Our job is to provide you intelligence, and you're supposed to do something with it. So I actually don't hold this on CSIS. I hold this on the government. So you have somebody that is acting on behalf of India, seemingly out in the open, trying to influence people about India, and then you then know that that person is feeding information back to India. Why is that person still in this government?
Well, I don't think you can actually kick an MP out of the House, but you can definitely kick them out of caucus.
You absolutely can kick them out of caucus, and then you can broadcast why you did it. You can certainly broadcast why you did it. So I don't put this on CSIS. I put this on the people that is getting this information and then doing nothing with it.
Do you mean the PMO?
That would be the PMO. But this goes back to the Hogue report. How are you saying that there's no MPs that are like, they're relying on the semantics. They're saying, well, there was no MPs that were wittingly done it. Well, that's a very dishonest statement to make, because if you yourself are saying, well, CSIS didn't assess it, well, then you can't say that there's not. And that's the problem.
Right. It's not yes or no. It's we don't know.
If they're trying to be transparent here, and Justice Hogue says, well, I hope everyone reads the report. Oh, you better believe we're reading it. And we're not happy.
In my view, the NSICOP report went too far in making assertions about the wittingness or complicity of parliamentarians. I recognize that NSICOP, as a committee of parliamentarians, considered the information before it from the viewpoint of parliamentarians commenting on the behavior of their colleagues who they considered to have crossed a line. However, in my view, these conclusions went beyond what the available intelligence could support. But I also recognize that I did not consider the information from the same perspectives as NSICOP. My focus was solely on what the intelligence revealed.
What this essentially means is that she's saying that, in the NSICOP committee, you have a bunch of MPs that are looking at this stuff, because that's what the NSICOP committee is made of, 11 MPs. And they're looking at this stuff, and they're looking at the intelligence, and then evaluating the behavior of these people, and they determined it to have crossed a line. That's basically what she's saying. So that's where, no doubt, that's where they're saying, okay, well, of course these people knew what they were doing. And how would they know that they knew what they were doing? Because they're doing the same job as they are. They're all MPs or parliamentarians. So that's most likely where this wittingly terminology came from in the NSICOP report. And then Justice Hogue then goes on to say, admittingly, I was just looking at the intelligence. That's all I was looking at. And I was letting the intelligence, kind of guide me. Okay, well, that's a problem then.
Well, she's looking at it through a different lens. NSICOP are looking at it through the lens of an MP. Hogue is looking at it through a legal lens. So, I suppose I understand that the conclusions may be slightly different, but these seem miles apart.
Yeah, I would agree. They are so far apart. They're not in the same...
They're on the same hemisphere. Yeah.
Yeah, anyone that doesn't believe we're married, I think we're married now. So, sorry, that doesn't fly. It doesn't fly. Oh, well, you came to a different conclusion. Well, admittedly, I looked at this from a completely different angle.
Like, completely different.
So now we get into a section of Chapter 18 where Justice Hogue is talking about the inaccuracies or errors in the NSICOP report. Remember how McGinty said that the NSICOP report was basically saying the exact same thing that the Hogue Commission was? Well, if that's the case, then why would the Hogue Commission say there was a bunch of errors in it?
A clear example of inaccurate intelligence came to light in the Commission's investigation of one identified assertion in the NSICOP report. NSICOP reported that an elected official proactively provided confidential information to Indian officials at a particular time. This was an extremely grave allegation, particularly because the information in question was significant. However, while investigating this allegation, the Commission discovered that at the time the elected official allegedly provided the confidential information, it had already been made public by the government. In other words, if the official did in fact provide the information to Indian officials, that information was not confidential at all at the time. On the contrary, it had already been shared with the public.
So there's so many problems with this. Think of it this way. Let's say that it's illegal to steal apples. And Bob goes by a farm, Bob steals an apple, and by the time Bob gets home, the law changed so that it's not illegal to steal apples anymore. Did Bob commit a crime?
Well, did Bob think he was committing a crime? Because I think that's part of the criminality of something is, I think Larry Brock called it the mens rea. It's like the mind of the crime. Do you know you're committing a crime? Like, do you believe you're committing a crime? Do you have that intent to commit the crime?
So in this case, we don't know, but it sounds like this is the word dance that they're doing. It sounds like this is what happened. The member of parliament took a piece of confidential information and then said, I'm going to provide that to the Indian government. And then on the way, whether he was waiting a couple days or waiting a couple hours or was walking over to the Indian embassy, on the way, the government of Canada released that information so it was no longer confidential. And then they provided it to the Indian government. I'm sorry. I don't care that the government of Canada declassified it and made it public. They didn't know they were going to do that, did they? Because if they did, this is the main point. If they thought and they knew that this was going to be made public, then there would be no reason for them to take that information and give it to the Indian government, because it would have already been public record. There would have been no point for them to do that. So I don't buy this. They obviously intended to take information that they thought was going to remain confidential and provide it to the Indian government. I don't buy it at all. So, like, this isn't like they're sending a link through the internet and saying, well, you know, it's kind of a down low link. It's available on the internet to the general public, but nobody else knows about. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about either a file or a hard document that they hand them, something like that. And then by the time that the Indian government got it, it was now on the internet.
It was public knowledge, yeah.
So this semantics, this is extremely concerning to me. You're basically trying to shoehorn this into, this isn't a big deal. And it sounds like this may be a different incident than the other one.
Do you know, maybe the report is correct, is that in the end, this particular situation is not a big deal because of what happened. But everything that led up to it was a big deal, right? It doesn't really matter what the result is. The book's on the floor either way. But if you meant to do it and you knew it was wrong, that's the problem. To be clear, the fact that I have concerns about the assertions of witting participation in foreign interference in the NSICOP report does not mean that the conduct of individuals referred to was irreproachable. Some information in the intelligence may be cause for concern or may justify further investigation. I heard evidence from CSIS witnesses that they believe there are and have been some relationships of concern between elected officials and foreign states. As the National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister, Natalie Drouin, explained, Even if the conduct does not amount to an MP being a traitor, this does not mean that their behavior should not be considered or addressed. Well, and I think that's an important distinction there, that maybe they don't meet that threshold of traitor, but what they're doing is definitely concerning and needs to stop.
And obviously nothing has been done. Like, again, if I'm the leader of a party, if I'm the leader of a government, and I hear or I see one person on my team is actively trying to influence people towards a particular country, that's enough for me. I'd be taking them aside and say, what the hell are you doing? You're a Canadian, buddy.
Yeah, but that's because you're a good leader.
Well,
You have leadership skills. Justin Trudeau does not.
yeah, he has a void of leadership skill. It's a vacuum. But this is the thing. Like, you do the most you need to do. You make an example of them. You send them at a caucus and you say, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to call a press conference. Bob's at a caucus because he did A, B, and C. There you go. Anybody else want to do that? No, I didn't think so. So that's what you do.
Right, and instead, we're just kind of protecting everybody hush-hush behind closed doors.
And I don't like that that isn't being called out here. Well, you know, it should be addressed. Pardon me. Pardon me? I think we need a little bit more stronger language than addressed. You're being paid by the Canadian taxpayer. You're supposed to work for the Canadian taxpayer, not the government of India.
The NSICOP report was right to raise concerns about foreign interference targeting parliamentarians. This is unquestionably a real issue. But based on the intelligence I reviewed and the evidence I heard, the problem is perhaps less widespread and less dramatic than the public discourse following the NSICOP report would suggest. Unfortunately, the comments about parliamentarians attracted the greatest public attention with troubling consequences. This is particularly true for MPs who are members of certain diaspora communities. For instance, I heard evidence from MP Jenny Kwan, herself an alleged victim of foreign interference, that the report has cast a cloud of suspicion on parliamentarians. She described walking by the House of Commons on her way to a committee hearing and being confronted by protesters calling parliamentarians, including her, quote-unquote, traitors. As Ms. Kwan explained, the issue with the cloud of suspicion, beyond the personal ramifications, is that the integrity of Parliament itself is called into question, and undermining democratic institutions and elected officials is exactly what threat actors want. It is exactly what threat actors want. And what are you guys going to do about it? I mean, Canadians have lost faith in this government. They have lost trust in this government. I think trust in our democratic institutions is arguably the worst it has been in a very long time. And it's your job as the government to fix that, to show us that we can trust you. And you haven't been doing that.
Well, and when you have McGuinty essentially saying, well, our report is basically saying the same thing.
There's not that much different between the report done by NSICOP. If you look at the bulk of the text, 90% of it is very similar, and the recommendations tend to be very overlapping.
Are you sure? Have you read the Hogue report?
Well, and that's not what it sounded like to the public. To the public, it sounded like there were 11 MPs or senators, past or present, that have been collaborating with foreign governments. And now the Hogue report comes out and says, no, not really.
Well, Hogue comes out right at the beginning and says, I don't really agree with the NSICOP report. So she's saying, no, it's not the same. So you still have this problem where the literal chair of the NSICOP committee who produced the report is saying, yeah, we're basically saying the same thing. And Hogue is saying, no, we're basically not.
Here's the thing, and I think this is important, is that you would think that Canadians would be relieved to receive the Hogue report saying that, no, there's not major interference going on, that we don't have traitors in our midst, etc., etc. You think we would be relieved to hear that. But this government, over the past nearly 10 years that it's been in office, has done nothing but sow distrust among Canadians so that we don't believe this Hogue report. We don't know who to believe. And that is a huge issue.
Well, and we showed you some examples from the Hogue report specifically specifically on the allegations of the parliamentarians. So Ho can sit there and say, well, you know, there's no traitors in Parliament. Well, you don't know that by your own admission, by your own semantics, do you? Now, what we do know, based on your report, is we can start matching some things up based on the claims of the NSICOP report. Number one, MPs were doing crap they absolutely should not have. Number two, MPs were receiving and accepting help from foreign states. Number three, MPs were passing confidential information, whether it was confidential in the end or not, doesn't really matter, to foreign states. Number four, we have MPs that were trying to influence their colleagues to act or vote in a manner that was consistent with a foreign country. I don't know what you would call that, but you know what I would call it? Not acting in the interest of the constituents in the riding that voted them there, and not acting in the interest of the Canadian government and the Canadian people. What I'm most angry at is the fact that they are trying to explain this away, and they're hoping nobody reads this.
Of course they are. It's huge. How many pages is that? And it's how many volumes? 4 or 5?
It's like
7. 7? They're hoping that this just flies under the radar, that this is just a footnote, that everybody's more concerned with what Jagmeet did or didn't say yesterday instead of this report that came out.
Right. This is important, folks. And my conclusion, and I haven't gone through all like 1,000 pages of this thing
yet.
My conclusion is that we need a new public inquiry when the Conservative government is in there. And we need to really assess what's going on here. And we also need to call out all of this bad behavior and put it in the sunlight. And then let's see what happens. Because if you weren't doing sketchy behavior, CSIS probably wouldn't have been paying attention to you. Or at least the people that were paying attention to you. What this also means is you can't be taking politics for granted. Because someone was disqualified from that Liberal race.
Why?
What if this guy was left in the race, and what if this guy would have been one of these 11? What the hell would have happened then?